You ever look at an airplane and just wonder? What's actually holding all those millions of parts together? We see the giant engines, the massive wings, but the real magic, the real genius, is hidden in the tiny details. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the unseen science that keeps these incredible machines in one piece. So let's start with a number, 2.4 million. That's how many individual fasteners, we're talking nuts, bolts, screws, rivets, are in just one Boeing 747. Think about that for a second. That's over 2 million individual points of failure that, well, simply cannot be allowed to fail. And that leads us to the billion-dollar question, right? How on earth do you make sure a 410 machine, vibrating like crazy at 35,000 feet, doesn't just fall apart? It is one of the biggest challenges in all of engineering. And you know what? The solution is shockingly old and incredibly smart. The answer isn't some fancy space-age alloy or some super complex computer. Nope, it all comes down to one of the 6 classical simple machines, something humans have been using for literally thousands of years, the humble wedge. Now, this is where it gets really cool. A screw thread, something we see every single day, is nothing more than an inclined plane, a wedge, that's been wrapped around a pole. That's it. This one simple, brilliant twist of geometry is what gives a screw all of its amazing power. Let's just walk through that. You start with a simple wedge, right? A ramp. Then you just wrap that ramp around a cylinder. And boom, you have a helix. You have a screw thread. What this amazing design does is convert a little bit of turning force, what engineers call torque, into a massive clamping force that pushes straight down, holding things together with unbelievable pressure. But here's the thing, not all threads are created equal. It's all about the angle of that wedge. A fine thread is like a long, shallow ramp. It takes more turns to tighten, but it creates way more friction and clamping force, which is great for resisting vibration. A coarse thread, on the other hand, is like a steep, short ramp. It's faster to assemble and less likely to strip, but it might loosen a bit easier. It's all a trade-off, and engineers have to pick the perfect thread for every single job. And that choice leads us to the fasteners themselves. This one beautiful idea, the wedge wrapped into a helix, has been spun off into an absolutely insane variety of specialized tools, each one perfected for a very specific task. Let's look at a couple. First off, let's settle an old argument. What's the difference between a bolt and a screw? In the world of aviation, it's pretty clear. A bolt usually has a smooth, unthreaded part called the grip, and you tighten it by turning a nut on the other end. A screw is pretty much always threaded along its whole length, and you tighten it by turning its head. Oh, and bolts? They're usually made of much stronger stuff. Now, let's talk about the heads. The one you see everywhere is the classic hex head. You know it, you love it. Simple, strong, and super easy to grab with a wrench. Then you've got the 12-point head. Why the extra points? It just gives you more angles to get a wrench on it, which is an absolute lifesaver when you're trying to work in the super cramped spaces inside a wing or fuselage. And of course, the Allen head or socket head. This one is internal, which is perfect when you need the fastener to sit flush with the surface, or for when you need to apply a lot of torque without the tool slipping off. The reason for all these different designs comes down to the 2 main forces, or stresses, they have to fight. There's tension, which is a force trying to pull the fastener apart, like stretching a rubber band. And then there's shear, a sideways force trying to slice it in half. So a bolt that's fighting tension needs a really strong head and nut. One fighting shear needs a super tough, thick shank. Okay, this brings us to the ultimate villain in our story, vibration. A plane in flight is basically a symphony of vibrations. From the engines, from the air rushing by, it never stops. So how do you keep those 2.4 million fasteners from just shaking themselves loose? Well, there are basically 2 main philosophies. First, you've got friction locking. This is where you just add a bunch of friction to make it harder for the nut to turn. The second and way more secure method is called positive locking. This creates an actual physical barrier that makes it impossible for the nut to rotate. A perfect example of a friction lock is the stiff nut. See, it's got a little nylon insert at the top, or sometimes the threads are just a little bit warped. When the bolt goes through, that insert squeezes it incredibly tight, creating a ton of friction that fights against vibration. Now for a positive lock. Check out the split pin, sometimes called a cotter pin. It's just beautiful in its simplicity. You tighten the nut, which has these little castles on it, line up a slot with a hole drilled in the bolt, and you just slide the pin through and bend the ends. That's it. That nut is now physically blocked. It cannot, will not back off. But the absolute gold standard, the undisputed king of positive locking, is safety wiring. This is a true art form. A mechanic meticulously threads a wire through a series of bolt heads. But here's the genius part. It's wired so that the tension on the wire is always pulling the bolts in the tightening direction. If one bolt even thinks about loosening, it just pulls the wire and tightens its neighbors. It's an incredible system that physically links everything together. So, bolts and screws are obviously a massive part of the story, but they're not the whole story. Aircraft use a whole bunch of other specialized connectors to get the job done. Believe it or not, the most common fastener on a plane isn't a bolt. It's a rivet. Unlike a screw, a rivet is permanent. You install it by squishing the tail to form a second head, clamping the metal sheets together forever. They're amazing against shear forces, and they're literally the backbone of the airplane's skin. To get one out, you have to destroy it. Okay, so rivets are permanent. But what about all those panels that mechanics need to open up all the time for inspections? You can't just be drilling out rivets every day. For that, engineers came up with another brilliant solution: quick-release fasteners. You'll see these things all over an aircraft's skin. They have names like Zeus, Camlock, and Audi. They all look a little different, but they share one key feature. They lock and unlock securely with just a simple quarter turn of a screwdriver. It's the absolute perfect marriage of security and easy access. So, the next time you're flying, cruising high above the clouds, just take a second. Remember that what's keeping you up there isn't just the big, obvious stuff. It's millions of tiny, hidden, perfectly designed pieces of metal, each one a tiny monument to the genius of the wedge, all working together in perfect, silent harmony. And that, right there, is the quiet brilliance that makes modern flight possible.